All right. Okay, that's going to go away. Okay. Getting bumped. All right, there we go. Okay, so where we left off was with the high-pass filter, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So now we go through the processing section. Now, depending on the mixing console you have, there. Well, first, before I get into this, any questions from last time? Like anything that, like, now that you've thought about it for a week, you're like, I didn't get that thing. Anything you want me to revisit real quick, aside from the whole thing? AJ's like,
That's okay, I'll pick it up. It'll be good.
It's on YouTube.
Oh, okay, gotcha. That's my bad. I got it like 2 days ago.
That's okay. I only put the video up 2 days ago.
Okay, great.
Any follow up? Any? All right, I'm gonna keep going. All right. So processing section. So after the signal gets in, it goes through the polarity inversion, it goes through the preamp, it goes through the high pass filter, then you hit the processing section. Now, depending on your mixing console and how much you paid for it and how big it is and all that, you're going to have a slightly different experience here. This particular mixing console has, the only processing it has is called an equalizer, otherwise known as an EQ. And this one is a 4-band semi-parametric EQ. Okay, so there's really three flavors of EQ out there. One is called a graphic EQ, which I lovingly refer to as the devil's plaything.
Okay. Do you want to elaborate on that?
They're the worst.
Okay.
Gotcha.
I'm not even going to teach you how to use them.
Okay.
Because they are the worst. First of all, they don't do what you think they do. You think that you're like painting this little picture of what sound's going to be. That's not what you're doing. Like, you think you're building like the curve, and that's not what's happening. Because every one of those sliders does way more than you think it does. Even on a third octave, like 31-band graphic EQ, that one slider, it has one frequency labeled on it, and you think, oh, it says 1,000 hertz, so I'm going to like boost or more likely cut 1,000 hertz. The thing is, you are affecting in that little duck of 1,000 hertz, you are probably affecting, maybe 300 hertz to 3 kilohertz with that little slider that just says 1,000 hertz, because it is a third octave filter, meaning it's supposedly affecting only a third octave range of frequencies, but that third octave is defined as the range between the 6 dB down points, meaning the frequency that's labeled on it, 1 kilohertz, is the peak of that little curve, okay? And then if you go to either side of that peak, eventually it's going to drop a certain amount. And when it drops 6 dB, that's the high end of the filter. When it drops 6 dB on the low end, that's the low end of the filter. And whatever that range is, that's the band. And so that distance between those two 6 dB down points is a third of an octave. But guess what? It keeps going. So it's still affecting frequencies well beyond that 6 dB down point. It's like a ramp. It's not a brick wall, it's a ramp. And so that third octave filter is actually affecting, an octave and a half, maybe more. So you think you're doing this really surgical thing, and in reality you're affecting an octave and a half or more worth of frequencies, to some extent. Now, not equally, right? Because there's a peak and it's slopes and everything. But the other problem with graphic EQs is, remember that one time when I said every electronic circuit that knows how to pass audio also makes noise? Well, in a third octave graphic EQ, how many electronic circuits are you passing your audio through? at least 31.
Oh.
Some of them even have high pass, low pass filters on them, so that's 33. 33 separate circuits that you are sending your audio through, and each one is going to have its own little noise, right? So they're noisy. Whether you've got it at 0 or not, it's still introducing noise. So anyway, they're the worst. Don't use them. Parametric EQs, on the other hand, are way better. And this is not a fully parametric EQ, but a fully parametric EQ will have a certain number of bands on it. And the bands is like, it's a set of controls that lets you isolate a certain area of the frequency spectrum that you're going to manipulate. And you will have 3 controls in each band, okay?
Can you slow down just for like a seckie?
Yeah.
Like, okay, has a number of bands?
Bands.
Bands.
B-A-N-D-S.
Okay.
You ready?
Yeah.
All right. So each band will have, in a fully parametric EQ, each band will have 3 controls. One will be the frequency control, and that is, a range of frequencies in the spectrum. Usually it's not like the full audible spectrum. Each band will be kind of have a narrower range. And that's the peak, okay? So or the cutoff, depending on what sort of filter it is. But you'll decide at what point does this thing centered on? What frequency? And then you will have what is called a Q or a bandwidth control. And what that will do is that will decide how many frequencies are you affecting? What's the range of frequencies you're affecting? Is it like a really small range that's centered on that thing you chose? Or is it a really wide range around that thing you chose? Are you affecting a lot of things or just, really small number of things?
And what was that one called?
The bandwidth or Q. And those, whether it's bandwidth or Q,
Is it Q's in like?
the letter Q.
Okay.
The values of bandwidth or Q are inverse. So bandwidth is the higher the value, the wider the range of frequencies. Whereas Q is the higher the value, the narrower the range of frequencies. So you kind of need to know which it is, right? Is this a Q knob or a bandwidth knob? And the difference is really important. Because if you turn it up, you need to know, am I getting narrower or am I getting wider? And the answer is it depends on whether it's a bandwidth or a Q. So you get that. And then the third control is a gain control, which is like a boost or cut control, sometimes called. And you can decide, now that I've defined where in the frequency spectrum I'm going and how wide a range I'm affecting, do I want to boost that range or reduce that range? And by how much? That's what that little gain control does. And then there's another part of each band that is either going to be a fixed thing or it might be a thing you can change, and that is the filter type. And the filter type could be like a peak/notch filter, which is really kind of what the graph EQ is. So you dial in the frequency as a center frequency, you decide the range, you're going to boost or cut, and it's just like, literally if you graphed it, it's like a little peak, right? It's going up or it's going down, and it's somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, okay? It could be a shelf EQ filter. And a shelf EQ filter is different from a peak. So the peak is, when you dial in the frequency, that frequency is the center of the range of frequencies you're affecting. Whereas a shelf is everything. If it's a high shelf, that means every frequency that is higher than the one I've selected will be manipulated. So if it's a high shelf and you select 2 kilohertz and then you boost it, every frequency higher than 2 kilohertz gets boosted. If it's a low shelf, then every frequency lower than the one you selected gets changed. So if you want to change a really wide swath, like that's a really good way to do it. It could also be possible for it to be a high pass or low pass filter with frequency selection and all that. So that would be a fully parametric EQ, and it would only, the difference would be how many of those do you get? 4 bands would be I have 4 of those groups of controls, which means I could do 4 different things to the frequency spectrum. Okay. This one is semi-parametric because it doesn't give you all of those controls. So this first one is a high shelf, and it's labeled HF, but it's a high shelf. And let me see if I can demonstrate. I'll do this. So the high shelf, if I boost it, you're going to hear all the high frequencies go up. Oh, hang on, there's a bypass button for this thing. So right now, which is good, because that means if you're not using it, it's not introducing noise. So I got to pop that in. High frequencies getting higher. High frequencies at normal. High frequencies turn down. You're doing enough sound gem that you can hear that, okay? So now it doesn't say on here what the starting frequency is for this shelf. I don't know. Can we guess? Pretty high. I'm gonna say like 8K and above or something. Pretty high. Okay. Now you also have a low shelf filter, which does the same thing, just boosting all the low frequencies. So I can boost all the lows. I can reduce all the lows. You hear the difference? So where do you think this is? It doesn't say, but. So it's probably around 250 hertz or below gets affected. Okay, and then you got these two in the middle. And this one is called high mid, and this one is called low mid. And what you get is a frequency selection, and the high mid ranges between 550 hertz and 13 kilohertz. 550 hertz and 13 kilohertz is what it says. So this is going to be a peak filter. Okay? So this will be like Peak Master on SoundGem. So I've got it set to 3 kilohertz right now. And I can boost 3 kilohertz or cut 3 kilohertz. Okay? And with it boosted, I could sweep it. I could take it all the way down to the 550. Or I could take it all the way up to the 13K. Okay. But I don't get to control what the range of frequencies are. I only get to control the center, and the range is fixed. And it doesn't say on here what that range is. So you'd have to either sort it out with your golden ears, or you'd have to look it up in the manual and figure it out and read it and tell you, okay? The second filter is the low mid filter, it's called, and it ranges from 80 hertz to 1.9 kilohertz. So here's the 80 hertz. There's the 1.9 kilohertz. And I could do 450. There's 450. Yeah. Okay. So, depending on your console, how much you paid for it, you might get some extra controls. Like you might get a Q or bandwidth adjustment for each of those things. So you might get a filter type toggle to switch between shelf and peak and high pass or something. This one doesn't. The filter types are fixed, and the top and bottom one are fixed high and low shelves. You don't get to select the starting frequency. It's burned into it. But the middle two, you do get to select the starting frequency. the center frequency. We have that peak filter. Now, one of the things I want you to notice is we spent a lot of time last week learning about that gain knob and what it's really for. I said it's for getting the signal as hot as you can get it without clipping, right? And you can hear what happens if I really do this wrong. Like if I decide to boost, it starts clipping. Hear it distorting? Why? Because I've got my gain set pretty high, which is where I want it to be. And so it's like right below the clip point already. So if I start boosting frequencies, it pushes it into clipping. Which is why you always, with very, very few exceptions, you want to reduce frequencies with your EQs, not boost them. So you want to reduce the things you have too much of, not boost the things you don't have enough of. And you have to kind of change the way you listen to things, because most of the time what we tend to naturally hear is, oh, I want more of whatever. We don't think of, I have too much of this. And you gotta like shift your thinking there. And that's why, like Peakmaster, for example, on SoundGym is really good, because it helps you to hear when things are too loud. Because you gotta train yourself to listen for when you have too much of something, so that you know what to reduce. Like, for example, let's say your natural tendency is to say, oh, I don't have enough bass, I need to turn up the bass. Well, to turn up the bass, you'd have to boost, and you don't want to do that. So instead, you're going to reduce the high frequencies so that the bass is more prominent. Okay, so you just have to think opposite. All right? So that's your rule of thumb for EQ. Now, some mixing consoles, not this one, would give you other things. And in this processing section, like a gate, maybe, or a compressor, might be in here. And in the digital consoles, you're more likely to see extra processing because, it's cheap to add it. And it just means more math for the CPU. But, you all right over there?
Yeah.
It's more work for the CPU, but you don't have to pay for extra buttons and knobs and stuff, so it's pretty easy to add it. So on digital consoles, you almost always will see, gate, compressor, some more bands of EQ than this, maybe even like a multi-band compressor or a dynamic EQ or something, which we won't get into today, but more things you could do. Now, because this console, they were trying to hit a price point, and so they had to limit how much they packed into this little thing, because they were also trying to make it fit inside of a rack, a regular 19-inch rack, so that, limited what they could put into it. So they're using a strategy they acknowledge that you might want more things than this. And so their way of giving you those more things is by using inserts. Now on the back of this console, right above the XLR, is a 1/4-inch connection labeled INS for insert. And this is a special 1/4-inch connection that is both an input and an output.
Ooh.
How is that possible? How could that one connector be both an input and an output simultaneously?
It's using the sending in on one pin and out on the other pin, or on the tip or the sleeve or whatever.
Yeah, so the 1/4-inch is actually a tip ring sleeve 1/4-inch, which means it's got 3 contacts in there. Now, normally in professional audio, those 3 would be used to create a balanced signal. You have a positive polarity, a negative polarity, and then the ground. But in this case, we're going to sacrifice balanced audio in order to save some space and some money. Because some consoles will give you separate in and out connections for the insert. But this console, single 1/4-inch connector. So what they do is they send audio out on the tip, and they bring it back on the ring, and both of them share the same ground. Okay?
Did they send that with the
No.
Oh.
And it gets better. That is not standard either.
It's
So
just-
some manufacturers do tip is the output, ring is the input. But some manufacturers do the tip as the input and the ring is the output. Or they call it tip send, ring return.
So it's really just a guessing game when you're like,
No, they'll tell you.
oh, okay.
Like sometimes it'll even be like screen printed on the back. I don't know if this one is. No, it's not. But they'll tell you in the manual.
Okay.
And then you have to either buy or make this cable.
Stupid.
Okay? So I made this cable, for sure.
That's not stupid. That's great.
And I've just got 2 wires, and I've got the XLR pins connector. That is soldered up to the tip. So the red wire that is going to pin 2 on here is soldered to the tip of this thing. Pin 3 is not connected. Pin 3 is dead on this thing, okay? And then pin 1 connects to the sleeve, okay? On this one, the socket connection, the red wire is connected to the ring of this thing, and then to pin 2 on here. Pin 3 is dead on this one as well, and pin 1 is also both pin 1s are soldered at the same place, and the 2 red wires are soldered to 2 different things. So I've created an output and an input, or it's otherwise known as a send and a receive, because the idea here is you are going to insert some extra processing into the signal chain. Okay? Like, I want more processing than they gave me. So I'm going to add something, and I'm going to do it by plugging this little connection. Now watch what happens here. So here's the little drum thing, and I'm going to plug this in. And I don't have any sound. Why? Because I have interrupted the flow of audio through this channel right now. I've picked up the sound after this input stage, so it's after that high pass filter. It's now been bypassed, and that signal's now here. And that signal chain picks back up here, so the sound comes back here and then goes through the EQ and everything else. And right now I don't have it. I don't have that connected. But if I plug these together, now I have the sound, right? I've just made a loop.
Yeah.
We don't like loops, do we? How do we feel about loops?
Well, I'm not showing this as a good idea.
Okay.
I'm just trying to represent to you what is happening.
Gotcha.
Okay.
That's there. It's coming back.
Yeah. So I'm just bringing it out here and I put it back in there. Yeah, this is maybe not the best idea to be default, because now that's 3 more connection points that could fail on you. But that's what's going on. Yes.
What is like the standard for a 1 or a 1/4 inch connector if you wanted to have that option? Oh, so you would just have to do that.
Well, a 1/4 inch connection can be used for lots of things. To be used as an insert like this, it depends on how they decided to wire it. Like if this was a ring send tip return console, this adapter wouldn't work. I would have to make a different one, or you put turnarounds on these in order to patch them in. Because here's what happens is, I have some outboard processing here. So this is a gate on this side. On this side it's a compressor. And a gate is an automatic mute button. And what it does is it just mutes and unmutes based on the parameters I tell it. I give it some rules, and it will mute and unmute the signal. So I'm going to send it into there. So I'm going to take the output or the send into the gate. And if you look, you should see the light kind of blinking back and forth now because it's got signal. Okay. And then I've got the output of that gate sitting right here. I'm going to plug that in. And now it's coming back. So right now I got the gate bypassed, so it's just, there's not doing anything. But if I turn it on, here's what happens. So currently it's muting everything all the time. Okay? And what I'm doing is you gotta pretend there's a little Smurf inside here. Okay? And it's wearing some headphones and it's listening.
So mean.
It's listening to the sound coming in. And it's got its hand on the mute button. And its job is to mute it and unmute it whenever you want it to. But you don't want to have to tell it all the time. You want to just give it some rules and it'll follow the rules. So there's a few ways here that you can tell it. First thing is you can basically use the idea that I only want to hear the loud things. I don't want to hear the quiet things. And in this case it's a drum. And a lot of times drum kits have lots of mics around them. And you don't want like the mic that's on the drum next to it to get into the mic that's on this snare drum, right? Theoretically, that drum is farther away, so it should be quieter getting into the snare drum mic. And so you can say, hey, only unmute it for when the snare drums hit. And the idea is the snare drum's probably the loudest thing if that's where the mic is pointed. So you say, all right, you figure out what loudness that is, and that's called a threshold control. So there's a knob here called threshold, and it ranges from -50 to out. Out meaning nothing will ever exceed the threshold. Okay, so I'm just going to turn this down and wait and see. So here it's kind of like right on the edge of what I want. Yeah, it's cutting off even the tail a little bit. Now this one, I'm not going to get rid of all those toms because they're actually all mixed together. But what I do want to do is I just want to set it up so it's only unmuting when a drum gets hit. And you hear how it's like cutting off that tail a little bit. So the Smurf is in there doing its job, right? Like, okay, I got it. Anything louder than this, I'm going to unmute it. As soon as it drops below that point, I'm going to mute it again. So he's doing it, okay? Now, what we can do is there's this release thing, and that kind of turns, instead of a mute button, it's now a fader. So you can say instead of pushing a button, you're just like cutting it and bringing it back in. And it's like, how quickly are you bringing it back in?
You said that was called release?
This is release. As I increase the release, the Smurf slows down that control. And I also have a toggle for the attack. And the attack is like, how quickly does it get muted? I can do slow or fast. So if I put it to slow, now you can see what it's doing. Red is muted, green is unmuted. You can see it toggling back and forth. Okay? There you go. Got an automatic mute button. Now I don't have to worry about the mics bleeding, the drums bleeding into this mic. Okay? But now it's picking back up and it's going through the EQ. So now this EQ will work as well. So, maybe I want to take out a little bit of that 500 hertz range or something on this thing. Make it a little snappier. Yeah?
And does the gain, when it's not like in the console, only apply to one channel? Or
Yeah.
is it like the whole thing?
Yeah. Well, because I'm only inserting it onto one channel.
Right, okay.
Some consoles will give you an insert on outputs or groups or something like that, but I don't know if this one does. It might. You can see. But after it's been gated, I am now processing the frequency. Right, so there's no EQ. There's with the EQ. Yeah.
So for an insert like this, would you need another one of those processors for every channel you want to do?
Yeah.
Okay, fun.
Yep.
I bet that adds up.
Yeah, so back in the olden times, when I first started doing sound, you would have this little console, and then you would have this big rack of this extra processing stuff. And we got really excited. In fact, I think we've got one up there on the shelf. Presonus came out with a 2 rack unit, so it was only this tall, 8-channel compressor. Ooh. So it actually had 8 compressors in it, in an only 2U rack space. It's super cool. So you could actually add compressors, 8 channels, and not have to have a 16U rack, which was really fun. In fact, if you dig around the shop a little bit over by the snakes, you'll see we actually have some insert snakes that'll have like 6 1/4 inches on one end, but 12 XLRs on the other end to give you input-output for up to 6 channels of inserts. So you would just go boom, 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 and then attach it into one of those cool 8-channel compressors, and you're off to the races.
Is there a reason why the processor uses XLRs instead of 1/4 inches?
Well, XLRs are better in every way,
Okay.
right?
Cool.
Like, if you have the option.
Because they don't pop, right?
Yeah, they don't pop, they lock in place, they are balanced, they are all, now, obviously our signal is not balanced, but if you wire this right, and you are going into XLR, the pin 1 is wired up on the other end, and as long as these wires are shielded, you at least get the benefit of the shielding, because that'll still dump to ground through the compressor, right? And the ground's also engaged here, but it's actually more like a common here. So you do get some noise rejection, even though it's not balanced. Okay. But yeah, there are plenty of equipment that has 1/4 inch. That's for sure. Okay. So you can add however many things you want. Like this also has a compressor in it, so I could move this over to the compressor and do that. The compressor is an automatic volume. The gate is an automatic mute button, the compressor is an automatic volume. And it just rides the fader for you. So instead of doing this all the time, and then like reducing it when it gets quiet, you could just have the Smurf do that for you. And it'll like ride the fader to even out the level. Okay?
Same Smurf. Or they're 2 Smurfs.
No, that was the same guy.
Could be the same Smurf. Could be the same
He's a
Smurf.
hard worker.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's
Could be Smurfette. Maybe she's got like both hands going, right? One on the bit mute button, one on the fader.
I'm pretty sure
What's
it's
that from?
For real.
Right?
Do that again.
I've been using this analogy for a lot of years, and I totally made up this sound Smurf. But did you know that it's real?
There's
So
real Smurfs.
it's in my office. I found it in a gift shop in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. They have these little like Smurf figurines, and there was a Smurf with wearing headphones holding a boom mic. And I was like,
That sounds smart.
the sound Smurf is real. So I bought one. It's sitting in my office right now on top of one of my.
Did you get this Smurf after you started using the analogy, or did
No, before it was it was after. So I'd already been using the story.
you
and
had
I,
already been using the
I
Smurf
just-
story?
I
and
just
you
pretended
found
This is him.
and then I was like, it exists. It's real. I just made him up. But
So does he only exist in like the off mixer ones, or is he in the mixer as
he
well?
could exist. Well, if the mixer has something that and I you use the Smurf to automate things for you,
Gotcha.
things that you don't want to do.
Is it the same Smurf? Or is it multiple?
You can have a whole army of them. I wrote an article about this on SoundGym, by the way.
Yeah.
You search the SoundGym blog.
Does he get?
Yeah.
Does he
I wrote an
union
article
rights?
about this.
Do the Smurfs work together? Is this a union?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
there's
there's Smurf.
Yes, I
How
want to
would
make
I
sure that
agree
they're
with
getting
that?
like health insurance.
So this could have potentially 4 Smurfs in it because it's got 2 gates and 2 compressors.
So you said it was one Smurf that was really fast.
You can daisy chain them together so that the gate and the compressor are like in series, and that would be one Smurf doing both. But you could actually have 4 separate signals being processed. two signals being gated and two signals being compressed, it would be 4 Smurfs.
Gotcha.
Okay. So just,
I found it.
you found it?
Yeah. This
Yep. That's my article.
this is awesome.
I made a comment. Somebody was asking like how do compressors work on SoundJam, and I made a comment. It's like, oh, pretend there's a Smurf in there, like running a volume knob. And anyway, the Yohai, one of the owners of SoundJam, was like, would you like write that up and put that in? Because that made a lot of sense. And I was like, okay, cool. So anyway,
Guys.
Look at him.
there he is.
I love
How
that.
freaking
Right on my desk.
cute he is.
I love him.
It's on my desk.
Jason, can we come meet the Smurf?
You can.
Yay!
Okay.
I like to imagine large, oversized mute buttons that are like the size of hands.
All right, so that's processing. That's the processing section. Any more questions about that? So the moral of the story is, it depends what you get, what they give you as far as processing. Could have a lot, could only have a little, but in most cases you can expand it using outboard equipment and inserts. You can add if they didn't give you everything you needed, you can expand it. Okay. Any questions? Follow up? Clarification? All right. Hopefully they give you a bypass button for whatever processing they have in line, because if you're not using it, you want to turn it off so that it's not this circuit that you're not using that is just introducing noise to the equation, right?
The outward equipment happens before, after the high pass, right?
Yeah, in this case, I'm pretty sure it happens after the high pass filter, but before it goes through the rest of the EQ. So it's like right there is where it goes.
And so if you bypass the EQ on that board, it'll still have all the outward stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. But I would have to bypass the actual gate here in order to have the gate applied. So this, I can put the Smurf on a 10 and just like bypass it, and then he goes and takes a break.
Takes a smoke break.
Yeah. And then when I'm ready, all right, come on back. There you go. All right. Okay. So the next thing that happens is what are called the buses. Now, let me explain. I don't know if this is really what it means. I actually don't know what the origin of the word bus is in the context of sound. One day I'll look that up and figure that out. But I've never bothered to figure that out. But the term bus, I assume it actually means like a bus, like the bus that you would get on and go on a trip. Okay, I don't know if that's what it really means, but it works. The idea is the sound. Now that you've filtered it and polarity inverted it and gained it and processed it, now you need to send it places. Okay, and you send it places by putting it on a bus that's going to that place that you want it to go. Okay, so if you want it to go to Albuquerque, you put it on the bus that's heading to Albuquerque. Now, in this case, our buses are not labeled in cities and states and countries. They are labeled instead things like aux 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then group, mix, and sub. Okay? And those go to different places in the console. Now, there are two main types of buses. There are the aux buses and the group buses. Okay? The group buses are buses that when you put the sound on that bus, all the sound goes on that bus. Like it's a binary, it's a yes or no. The sound is either on that bus or it's not on that bus. Okay? All or nothing. Okay? Whereas the auxes, it's you get to decide how much of the sound goes on that bus. And you get a knob for that. So if you're sending some of the sound onto the aux 1 bus, there's a knob here that you can turn. Now I have currently this little Fostech monitor set up on aux 1. And so if I turn this little knob, there's a little bit of sound, there's a little bit of the kick drums on there. A little more is on there now. A little more, right? I can do it for, well, I'll do it for the bass.
So even if the fader is down, it just sends it?
Sometimes. So I'll get to that in a sec.
Sorry.
But right now, I want the thing I want you to absorb is that I can decide how much sound gets on that bus. Okay? Right? Whereas for the mix bus, which is the one that's hooked up to these other speakers, it is either everything or nothing. Okay? Yes.
Mix bus, do you mean
Group. Like it's called mix here. It's labeled mix. The group is called mix. But yes. So the mix group bus. Thank you for that clarification. It's either everything or nothing. There's no. I don't get to decide how much. Okay. Everything or nothing. All right. Now. Let's go back to the auxes now. Go back to Ace's question. You get two options here. You can do pre-fade auxes or post-fade auxes. Pre-fade auxes, route that in even if the fader is down. Okay? So the fader can be up or down and it doesn't change how much of the sound is going onto that bus. It's just independent of that. Okay? Now, you also have post-fade buses. Let me move this over to a post-fade bus. Okay. So this is a post-fade bus. See how I'm turning the knob, but I'm not getting any sound? I only get the sound if the fader's up. Okay. So I still decide how much goes in there, but it's relative to both the fader and the knob. So right now the fader is at 0 or unity, which means it's just the only one that really matters now is the knob. But if the fader was at -20, then the amount of sound that goes on the bus is -20 plus whatever I dial in on the knob. Okay? But the cool thing is then, if I set this knob to that much, and then I ride the fader still works, still adjusts it, right? But this is relative to what is on the main, what is on the group. So if I put this into the group now, it's now coming out of both, and I can put a lot of it into the aux, and now you're probably hearing it there more prominently than you're hearing it in the ones back here. And that relative amount stays consistent, right? As I move the fader.
Jason,
Yes.
can you go back like a couple steps
Yep.
to when before, like right after you switched it to post fader, and then you were saying that when you put it at like -20
Yeah.
or -20 on the fader, and then you turn it up on the post fader, it's that plus
Yeah.
what's there. Can you just
Yeah, so I set the fader to, let's see, so I'll set the knob to, let's see, I'll set it to, it doesn't say, but I'm going to guess this is like -3 or something. So 0 would be no change. Just take the sound as it is, put it onto the aux, okay? And I can do -3 dB quieter than whatever is sitting on the circuit there. Or I could do 6 dB more. We can amplify it a little bit as I'm sending it. So let me reduce it a little bit. So but remember, this is picking that up after the fader. So if the fader, if I try to take the fader up, the fader is currently set to -30. So already the fader is attenuating that sound that's on the circuit by 30 dB, and then it sends it through this knob that says take another 3 dB off of it and put it on the bus.
So
Okay.
it's really minus 33 dB.
Yeah. Okay. But the nice thing about the post fade is you set up that balance and it stays consistent as you move the fader. So, well, I'll elaborate in a minute. Then when you get down here to the groups, depending on the console, you will have more or less of these. In this case, I have technically 4 groups, but they are in pairs of 2. So I have a group called mix and a group called sub. And the sub doesn't stand for subwoofer. It stands for submix. Okay? But what it says doesn't really matter. It could just as easily say 1 and 2, group 1 and 2. Or it could say 1/2 on the first one and then 3/4 on the second one, because it's in pairs. So turns out when you hit the mix button, it actually is routing all of the sound to both of these 2 yellow outputs. And they are currently labeled mix L for left and mix R for right, because there's this assumption that everything in the world is done in stereo, which is simply not true. Stereo is not real, by the way. It's not. It's not real.
Elaborate.
No, don't elaborate.
I would like the elaboration.
No,
Keep it.
there is no sound that happens naturally in real life that is stereo.
Okay.
Okay? Stereo is something that human beings create. It's an effect that human beings make. Okay? So it's not real. It's a construct,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
But we treat it as though it's this real thing, that everything must be that. And it's just not that. The real world is not in stereo. The real world is far more complicated.
You have a left and right ear. I think that's the basic idea.
Yeah,
No,
that's
the
right.
idea is that back when we started putting sound in people's houses, people were disappointed by the experience because they had the one little horn on the Victrola that was playing it, and it was like, well, I mean, I'm hearing it, but it doesn't sound as cool as it does in real life.
Because of my left and right ears.
Well, no, because because you're like, but what's really happening is like if you're listening to a recording of an ensemble play music, like you've got an instrument there, one there, one there, one there, one there, one there, maybe one up there, one up there, one over here, like, and our ear system is built to figure that out, right? We're really good at figuring out where something is coming from on this horizontal plane. We're not as good at figuring out where something is coming from on the vertical plane. And that's just because of, yes, the way our ears are mounted. And we've never had to get really good at this, at the vertical thing, because the things that kill us tend to not come from up above. The things that kill us tend to come at us from the sides or the behind, right? And so we've gotten really good at hearing, oh, there's something there coming to kill me, But the things that tend to kill us don't tend to come from the sky very often. Okay? There are other creatures that have had to get good at that, but we have not. Okay? And so we're really good at this, right? And so good at it that we miss it when it's gone. And so when you're listening to the sound coming out of that one little horn on the Victrola, you're like, oh, this is kind of a downer. I mean, like in real life, I hear things coming at me from all around me, and sometimes those things are scary, and that's exciting, And so, well, of course, this was the early 20th century, and it was a huge feat just to get that one thing in someone's house. But to get 100 things in their house so that like, you know, everything can be coming out, you know, that was just not gonna happen. So yeah, so we thought of, well, okay, well, how is it that we hear that? We hear those different things because yes, they hit our ears. The sound, the reason we know something's coming from there is because that sound hits both of our ears, but it hits the right ear sooner than it hits the left ear. And the phase response is a little bit different by the time it wraps around your head and gets there, and that's how we know to focus our attention that direction. And so the idea behind stereo is, well, okay, so we can't create that whole thing, but we can kind of do it within a window. So we could like have two little horns or two little speakers, one over here and one over there, and at least between those two, we could replicate kind of this effect because we could shift the different sounds between one side or the other, and that is very similar to what happens when, you know, a real sound hits one ear a little bit louder and a little bit sooner than the other ear. It's kind of like what's going to happen. But the thing is, just because it's a stereo doesn't mean you can make it sound like it's coming from behind you, right? It's an approximation that gets you something. It gets you a little slice of what real life might sound like. But real life is just far more complicated than that. And it only works, by the way, if there's only one person sitting in the right place between those two things. You suddenly, I mean, if this was designed for living rooms and headphones, but originally living rooms. So you're sitting in your living room and you can sit perfectly between those two things, and now the effect works. But you move one foot to the right, and suddenly the effect is blown. Because now the timings aren't right, and things are hitting your ears in not the right balance and not the right timing, and so the imaging effect collapses. So it only works if you can sit in that exact spot. Well, what if you have three people?
And here comes the mid-side talk.
You could like put everybody in a row like this and try to keep them spaced similar, but now try to do that in a big place where there's 100 people or 1,000 people. Yeah, you can't get 1,000 people all sitting perfectly between those two things. So it works in living rooms. It doesn't work in venues where there's lots of people. It just doesn't. It doesn't work. And yet, all of these mixers that are designed to be used in rooms where there's lots of people, they all lock into this stereo idea that we know doesn't work. It doesn't work in big rooms with lots of people, and yet all the mixers that are designed to do sound for lots of people seem to think that that's what we're doing, and it's hardly ever what we're doing.
Why? You should write a strongly worded email.
Why do they think that?
What's that?
Why do they think that? What is their argument?
Big sound, more money.
Well, the argument is everyone starts out doing sound in their living room, right? And so they get enamored by this idea of stereo, and they're like, well, that works. And most people never bother to actually do the thought exercise that leads them to the conclusion of, actually, it doesn't work anywhere except my living room.
What would you call it then? Like, if they're, because if it's a construct, then it like gives you an idea of how to set it up. So, would there be like,
Well, I mean, nowadays we're getting into what's called object-oriented mixing, where things like Elisa and D&B Soundscape and SpaceMac Go and stuff like that, what they're really doing, if you've ever been to a show that uses that kind of technology, like they have 5 or 6 stacks of like line arrays or speakers over the stage. And so if you're looking at the stage and you want it to sound like the sound is coming from this side of the stage, you actually play the sound out of the stack of loudspeakers that's closest to that spot on the stage. And you've got potentially 6 places. And no matter where you're in the house, like you could be over here, and you're still going to hear it coming out of that thing that's right above the head of that instrument that's standing there, right? So that's where we're headed right now.
well, and do they do that because like a lot of the sound is absorbed by how many bodies are?
Well, the absorption just affects how loud it is, and it affects how reverberant it is. But the perception of where it comes from isn't affected a whole lot by how many people there are. But the idea is to get you that more resolution is you just add more speakers. Like the thing that no one ever even considered 100 years ago, which was like, could we put 50 speakers in someone's living room? No, that's ridiculous. Well, now it's not. It's not ridiculous now, actually.
And second floor of the library right now.
Yeah, right? Yeah, go to the second floor of the library. That's literally what we've done. And so, so that's like possible now. And so, anyway.
Is that how you did like, you fixed that with the polarizing thing that you were talking about last year?
That's a little trick called mid-side that is a way of getting a stereo-like effect. It's not stereo, it's a stereo, it's an effect that's similar to stereo, and get it to work for a larger group of people, not necessarily all sitting in the center. That is probably outside the scope of our class, but the point that I was trying to make is that this looks like it's a two-group console, but it's two stereo groups. And we know that stereo doesn't work in live venues. And so, if you can let go of that, if you can let go of this stereo thing, just let it go. It doesn't work. Just admit it. And if you can let go, guess what you get?
No stereo.
4 groups instead of 2.
Gotcha.
Double the stereo.
You get 2 more free groups.
Wow.
Because you can, instead of group sub left and group sub right, you could just have, well, I'm just going to call that group 1, I'll call this group 2, call this group 3, call that group 4. And as long as if you can let go of the idea that I have to stereo image between those 2 things, you could just treat them as they're 4 separate things.
Would you have to like change the way they're like programmed, like where they're going?
Maybe, but here's what happens. So there is this thing called a pan knob right here. That's what the yellow thing is. And what it does is it decides how much between those 2 groups, how much is the sound distributed across those 2. If it's straight up, it's putting it equally between the 2. If you put it slightly counterclockwise, it's going to put a little bit more over to the left than it does to the right. You take it all the way counterclockwise, and it's only going to put it out of that one. Now you put it all the way clockwise, and it only puts it out of the one on the right.
And that's like the outs, or are they?
Yeah, so there's 2 outs here, right? So there's 2 groups, basically, called the out. These are called mixed left, mixed right. And each of these 2 loudspeakers is patched to one of those 2 outputs. And they've got separate faders, don't they?
Yeah.
It's not one fader. Sometimes it's one fader, and that's super annoying.
Yeah.
Because then you don't get to get the extra group. But this one has separate faders. And so if you can let go of the stereo thing, then you just say, all right, forget this stupid pan thing. It doesn't work anyway. So instead, I'm just going to say, all right, I'm going to put the piano out of, if I just say this mixed left is now my group 1 and the mixed right is now my group 2, I'm just going to say, all right, well, the piano I'll put out of 1 by just moving those 2 to the right. And then the guitar I'll put out to group 2.
What if the buses / stereo things are linked together? Because I've had boards that are like
These are.
cool.
So I push that one mix button and it goes to both.
Yeah, I just mean like if like
When they move
yes,
together,
when
like
the faders move, they move
Oh.
together.
Where the 2 faders are linked together.
Oh yeah, well that's what I was saying. That's what I was saying earlier. It's like over here, sometimes this will be one fader, and that's obnoxious.
So you can't do it if they're linked together like
Yeah.
that. You just
Yeah.
have to suck it up.
Yeah.
Oh.
At that point, it's just, I mean, you still can use them as separate paths, but you can't control the overall level of the 2 things separately from the console, which is super obnoxious.
Do you think you could like go into it and like break it and like?
You could, so you could go outboard and process it after the fact.
Mm, it's a lot of work.
That is a lot of work. So the idea behind this is like you could have 4 different speakers somewhere, right, in the room, and you could decide where each sound is going to go. So you've got 4 groups, and the groups are groups of sounds, right? It's a bus that has groups of sounds. So you could have all the drums, so all 3 of the drums could be over here on that one, right? And then the bass could be over on that one. And then I could have another one where the piano could be over in that one, right? And then, you know, so on and so forth. That's way more interesting than trying to pretend that this stereo thing works. When it doesn't actually, and if you actually thought about it for a second and really paid attention to what you're listening to, you realize that you're putting a lot of effort into something that actually isn't working.
So are you the only one who's had this epiphany, or?
No, I'm not the only one that has it. I'm just one of the more vocal
sound
people.
not listening?
You're like the one person idiot
I
person.
kinda go with that.
Brooke?
Jason's
I was just gonna say, like, with the soundscape and, like, the, I guess, freestyle one where you can put different instruments, you can
Mhm.
kind of map them out like that, right? You can have some come, like, from the left and from the right.
That's a different thing. The soundscape thing is an object-oriented mixing thing. And the whole point of that is you don't have to care where the speakers are. So you're not deciding which speakers the sound comes out of.
It's just general.
You're deciding where you want the audience to perceive the sound to be coming from. And the processor decides which speakers it has to put it out of in order for the audience to perceive that. So it's a different way of thinking. It's a totally different thing. Okay? This is mixing to destinations, and this is how we've been doing it for decades. Is we have these little groups, and each group is a destination, and we decide what sounds are going to come out of which place in the room, and that. So you know, we know where the speakers are, and we have a group for each speaker, and we route the sound to each one that we want to have it come out of. Okay. Now here's where it gets a little interesting. You know how I said this second pair of groups is called sub? Because there's a special kind of group called a subgroup. And a subgroup can have its own outputs. So these 2 red faders could be 2 totally different outputs that go to 2 totally different speakers in the room. Or they could collect a group of sounds here on this fader and then dump that sound into the other 2 groups. Now, why would you want to do that? Let me explain. So I've got these 3 drum sounds here, right? So I've got the kick drum, the snare drum with the toms, and the cymbals, right? Well, let's get a balance here. That sounds all right. Okay, so I think, let's say that's what I think sounds good, that the faders are not all at the same level, right? They're all different levels. Well, what if I want to turn the drums down?
put it on this certain thing.
Well, I would have to grab these faders and move them together while maintaining that relative balance in order to fade it down. Right? Well, okay, the cymbals one's going to hit first. Now the cymbals are out, but the other 2 are still going. That's kind of weird. So that's an option. Or I could not put them into the mixed group, and I could instead put them into the subgroup, pan them all over to the left, and now it's here. Now I don't have an output hooked up to this group, but I have this button here that says mix. And this will send these groups into this group. So I can say, and now I can control the drums with 1 fader. Now, that may not sound impressive right now because I could do the same thing here, right? And I could have always done that, right? But what if I have everything else going and I just want to fade the drums? Subgroup.
So you said it dumps it onto the other faders?
Yeah, so it's collecting those 3 drum sounds here onto this fader. And then I push this mix button to say, take everything on these 2 red faders and mix them into the yellow ones.
Okay.
With
But
everything else.
On another board, what would that be? The yellow ones?
It would be whatever whatever you want. I mean, some groups will let you route other groups into them. So subgroups are groups that can be routed into other groups. Right? So that's super useful. And if you've got a console that has like 6 or 8 subgroups, then you can have one subgroup for all of your drums, you can have one subgroup for all of your guitars, one subgroup for all of your voices, one subgroup for all your sound effects, whatever. And instead of trying to move 38 faders with 10 fingers, and really only 4 of them are useful for mixing, or 8 of them are useful for mixing, 4 on each. Your thumbs are not super useful for mixing because they don't go the right direction.
So that's me in high school.
Right? Like, you need to go up and down. Your thumbs want to go left and right. So the thumbs are not useful for mixing. So you really don't have 8 fingers that are useful for moving faders. Well, what if you got to move 30 faders? Subgroups can really help you out, right? So you can collapse a bunch of them into subgroups. Okay, now I got 1 finger, that's going to be the drums. This finger will be the guitars. This finger will be the vocals. This finger will be the sound effects. And then the thumb's not useful, so this finger will be the and now you're mixing with the subgroups. And the subgroups all go out to the mains, which then go out to the system, right?
When you're in the subgroups, can you still say one guitar is too hot in the guitar subgroup? Can you
Yeah.
individually bring
Yeah,
them in?
so watch, I can do that with the drums. So what if I decide I need more cymbals? I can still go back here and adjust the mix of the cymbals, right? But I'm still controlling the overall drums here. Yeah, yeah,
It's like file management.
it is.
Weird way.
It is. Okay.
It's like file management.
All right, so we've got groups and we've got auxes, and within the auxes we have pre-fade auxes or post-fade auxes. What do you use the auxes for? Well, let's see if we can think of some things. The rule of thumb, my rule of thumb that might help you, is you use the groups for things the audience hears. And you use the auxes for things that not audience hears. So what are not audience things that might need to hear sounds that are in your console?
Like in your monitors?
Dressing rooms, monitors on stage,
Stage management feed.
yep, booth feed, those are all things that are not audience that might need to hear things that are in your mixer, and that's what you use the auxes for. There's another category of things that could be called not audience that you want to have hear your sound. That could be more upper processors, or recording devices, or other computers that are going to collect the sound and do things to it, right? So it doesn't have to be people. It could be more equipment that the audience, that's not audience. So like this thing here is a reverb processor. So what if I wanted to add some reverb to this stuff? Okay, let's see if we can do that. This thing doesn't look like it's turning on very well, does it?
It does not.
Jason, for those, for the category of things that auxes would use that's not people, would that be that guy that came to Steven Center to record the jazz band?
Yeah, that could be. You could do auxes with that. There's another thing you could do for that, which we haven't talked about yet. But auxes is certainly an option for that.
For concert mixing, would you use the auxes for in-ear monitors, or is that
For what now?
for like in-ear monitors?
Uh-huh,
for, like,
yeah.
their tracks?
Yep, you can use auxes for that.
How is it wolf track?
Let's see if
You
it's
got something on your shoe.
Never mind.
How is it wolf
What's
track?
that?
You had something on your shoe.
I don't anymore.
No longer.
There's like things
No
that-
wolves.
I thought you were talking about the gun, and I was like, yeah, it is good.
Okay, it's my power. Okay, so this is a reverb processor. So, let's. You know what reverb is?
Yes.
Reverb is.
It bounces it back.
What's
I
that?
said it bounces it back.
Yeah, reverb is akin to like haze. It's like reverb is to sound people like haze is to lighting people. Okay, so reverb is like, I mean, it's happening in real life right now with my voice, because you're hearing my voice bounce off the walls and stuff to get to you, and it makes it sound a little boomier. It's a natural effect, happens in real life. Anybody notice how you always sound better singing in the shower than somewhere else? It's because there's more reverb in the shower. Okay, the reflections kind of blur everything together and smooths out all the edges and the mistakes and everything. So reverb is super useful.
What are your thoughts on people calling it an echo?
An echo is something. So reverb is really dense echoes. So dense that you can't tell them apart. Whereas echoes, you can tell them apart. Like it would be echo, 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 echo. There are separate events that you can tell them apart. But reverb, those echoes are so close together that you can't tell them apart. All right, I'm going to plug this into aux 3. And,
Aux 3 of what channel?
well, there's an output on the console called aux 3,
Okay.
Oh, so all channels go to that aux.
if I want
If
them
you
to.
want them to.
But what if you don't want them to?
I don't have to.
Just asking.
No, like that's the answer. Like if I don't want to, I don't have to.
Well, how would you not do that?
I will show you
Okay.
as soon as I patch it in.
Takes you 10.
So you send it into the aux, and it just turns into a separate thing on its own that you can send those channels to that, essentially.
Yeah. So RAM is corrupted. Settings cleared. Okay, that's fine. Option
This is fine.
reset. Okay. Reset will initialize the wizard. Oh no, we're gonna initialize the wizard. I hope it'll be
Is that
okay.
different from this one?
Oh,
Oh, it's
the summer-
Gargamel.
Why
God.
did we put them together?
There we go.
Oh, I get it, because it's a reverb wizard.
Wait, really? Is that why? I don't think that's why.
No.
If you want to sound like the wizard, you just apply reverb. That's why.
That's not true.
Okay, this will work. Let me. Oh. What am I doing?
I have one person left. Nothing worth repeating.
All right. Sorry, I'm just programming this thing so it sounds like something interesting,
Like a wizard.
like a reverb. All right. So, does anybody remember what aux I put this in? I forgot.
3.
Okay, good. So, here's aux 3. Now, this is the main output control for aux 3. Okay. So if this is down, no sound goes into the reverb processor. Okay. So I'll go ahead and take that up to 0 for unity and leave it there. And so now what I've done is I've patched the output of aux 3 to the input of the reverb processor. So I'm going to send whatever sounds I want into that, and those sounds are going to get
Reverby.
reverby. They're going to get blurred together. And then So there's a Smurf in there that's
No, it's Gargamel.
that's sure. It's messing it all up and is then gonna take whatever happens to it and send it out of an output. So I've got it, I plugged in a cable to that output and I plugged it in to channel 12. So I've got an extra input channel I hadn't used yet. So channel 12 is now my reverb. Okay? So here's what's going to happen. What things would we like to reverb?
The bass.
Just make the drums really reverby, says the reverb in the drums.
Well, I'll tell you what. Let's just do one thing at a time. Let's say we're going to do this guitar, okay? So I'm going to turn up this aux 3 send on that guitar channel. And that's going to send it out to the aux 3. And you should see now there's signal coming into the reverb, okay? So it's getting reverb now. So theoretically that sound's coming out of there and is coming back now onto input 12. So if I take input 12, I'm going to turn up the gain pretty good, right? Because that's what we do with gain. And, oh. I don't have to turn up as high as I thought because it's line level, right? So it'll clip. And I didn't do the 1/4 inch trick. So we'll just put it through there. Okay, so now I'm going to route it to the mix because that's where these are. And then I'm going to bring it up. Now, so this is just the reverb. Oh, hang on. This is just the reverb.
Sounds great.
Okay? And reverb all by itself is usually not really great. I've got this programmed to be 100% wet, meaning only give me the reverb. Okay?
What did you press?
Oh, I'm just muting the channel. I switched the aux to a pre-fade so I can let you just hear the wet. But here's the dry. Right? There's no well, there might be some natural reverb that's in the recording, just from whatever the room was this was recorded in. But what you want to do is you want to get a good mix of that. So how much of the reverb do we want? And you control that with how much you send into the aux.
Well, could you just up and down the fader?
Well, yeah, but watch.
Well,
It's
I mean, like,
this is a post fade. I'm using a post fade aux, which means the fader's down, none of the sound goes into the reverb processor, which means nothing comes back. And that's usually what you want, because if you put it in pre-fade, and then you decide you want the guitar to be quieter, you can't take it out because you still have the reverb. So you want this to be a post-fade aux, so that once you get this balance right, because I'm just going to put the wet up really hot, and then I'm going to decide how much reverb I want using the aux send.
so what's the point of the wet fader if you can just control the reverb?
I will show you.
Hey,
So hang in there.
sorry.
So that's how much I want that. Now what about this guitar? Okay. That's the dry. That's the wet. Okay. That's pretty good. How much of the bass do I want? That sounds good. Now what about the piano? So there's the piano. How much reverb do I want? I mean, probably not as much. It's already kind of reverby anyway. Okay. it's dry, I'm just gonna add a little bit of reverb to this, right? As opposed to the other things. Okay? Then I can bring my drums in. I don't have any reverb on the drum part.
You have to individually go in
Yeah.
and do, you can't just,
Yeah, they have reverb on
Not on this console. It won't let you route a group into an aux, but some consoles will do that.
a like a
Yeah, it might. Okay, so let me. I'm gonna send a little bit of the cymbals into the reverb. So there's lots of reverb, right? I don't know that much. Okay, there we go. So let's say this is my mix now. That's no reverb, right? That's with the reverb. Now, so let's pretend this song ends, which it doesn't, but I can make it end. Actually, I'll do this one. Okay, I don't have enough groups to, no, I do actually. So let me put the other stuff. I'll use my other group for the other things. Okay. So when it gets to the end, I want that cymbal to kind of ring out, right? Right? This is why you put the reverb on fader.
That was classic.
See if I can do that even better. Right? Oh wait, my guitar is. How do I still have guitar? Oh. There we go. Alright, let's do that. Right. Still getting. Oh, it's because of the reverb. Yeah. Okay, but you can mix the reverb like it's a whole different sound. Like when I'm doing shows, like if you ever do a musical with me, I'm gonna say, I want reverb on the voices when they sing, but no reverb when they talk. Okay? And so, I'll give you an example. So here's my vocal mic. This one, okay, so we'll go into here. And, okay, there's that. Now, what I want to do is I can add reverb to this. Okay, so there's reverb now in my voice. Now this sounds really good, sounds really great, but when I talk, it doesn't sound great. Okay, so when I talk, this is better, but then when I start humming, this sounds cooler, right? So I want reverb when they're singing or humming, but not when they're talking. Okay? So I'm going to give you a special fader that's just the reverb, and you're going to mix that all the time. All right? Because sometimes I want it, sometimes I don't. Okay? Yeah? Okay. So that's an example of how you would use a post-fade aux. Because a post-fade aux, when you're sending it out to processing like that, when I reduce the fader for the thing, I want the reverb to get quieter too, because I've got that balance set up just right. Okay? But things like monitors, like let's say you've got performers on a stage, and they need to hear this music, and what works for them isn't necessarily what works for the audience. And you're going to get it dialed in right for them, and then if you decide that you need to make something louder or quieter out for the audience, you don't want that to change anything for the people on stage, right? Because it's working for them. So you would feed it to them using a pre-fade aux, which is what this is. So let's bring this all up again. Okay. So I've got this working, but let's say this is my stage monitor for the cast. Okay. So let me put it back on 1.
Did you put reverb on the stage monitor?
You could if you wanted to. I don't usually. Because reverb affects clarity. And usually the performers want clarity more than they want reverb. All right. So here's the aux 1. So let's say all they want is the rhythm section. So they know where the beat is. Okay? Now, the cool thing is, like, this works for them. They can hear what they're doing, but I'm mixing the show here. No matter what I do out to the house, like, they're still hearing that the same. That's why you want that to be a pre-fade on. Because you don't want messing around with the fader to change it for them. But yes, of course you could add reverb if you want. So you could route the reverb into the aux, but I don't usually do that. Okay. Questions? All right, I've covered everything I wanted to cover about this console, I think. There's more things, but we'll talk about those things another time. The other thing is, Brooke was asking about the record feed. There's another option here. There's a little 1/4-inch connector on the back of here called the direct out. And that just takes the sound straight off the preamp and sends it right back out, but this time balanced. And it's not affected by any of the other processing or the fader or the auxes or anything. So sometimes you can use your direct outs to do a recorded feed. And that can be pre or post fade, depending on what you want. This one lets you toggle it. You can toggle the direct out to be pre-fade or post-fade. Okay, so what I want to show you here is, because it's time for your assignment. So let's talk about what you're going to have to do. So if you go onto Canvas, and there's our class. And we're going to go to assignments. And your first assignment is the analog mixer programming assignment. Now here's the thing with analog mixers. They're really bad at remembering things. There's no storage on here. There's no data storage. It's an analog circuit. There's no computer chip in here that can remember things, okay? Which means the only way that, once you dial this in, the only way that all of that work gets kept is if you don't change anything. Like, nobody can turn any knobs or push any buttons. Well, what if someone pushes the knobs and turns the buttons? Or turns buttons and pushes, whatever. Turns the knobs and pushes buttons. Then you gotta, like, figure out. I mean, there's a lot of knobs and a lot of buttons on this thing. Somebody comes and turns a couple of them, and things don't sound right. How do you fix it? Well, you got to figure out which thing changed, and there's a lot of things that could have changed. You got to go through each one. What is it? Was it this? And in the process of figuring that out, you might turn some other things and make things worse, right? Brooke?
I just wanted to say that the due dates don't match with the syllabus dates. Like, it's from 2022.
Oh, I haven't updated. I'll fix that in a second. That's a weakness. And it was a weakness we lived with for a really, really long time. I mean, nowadays, with the digital consoles, they can remember. And you can just, like, say, store the current settings for everything, and then if it changes, you can pull that back. I remember the first time I got to use a digital mixer on a show. It was super exciting because I always had the custodians always come in to, like, clean the theater, and they would always try to, like, I don't know what they were doing. I don't know if they were trying to like play music while they were cleaning, or if they were just like dusting things and pushing things. They were changing things. And when I had a digital mixer, I was like, this is great. I can just come back and hit a button, and all my settings come back. Well, before that happened, which that is an innovation within my lifetime that's happened. You've had that all your life. I have not. But the way that we would do it is the mixer would ship with one of these. Okay, this is called a markup sheet. Okay, so this is literally just a picture of the controls on the console. Okay, so this is a picture of what looks like 2, 4, 6, 8 channels, 8 input channels, and then they give you a picture of the output section. Well, actually, it gives you it's the rest of them because it's a total of 12.
Okay.
8. No.
It's 10 and 12. There's 10 on the.
Is there 10? Did I miscount? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so it's the whole thing. So you get 1 through 10, and then here's the other half, right? So sometimes if it was a bigger console, they would just give you this, and you could make copies of it to get the rest of it. Okay. Anyway, there's the whole thing. So what you would do is you would literally print this out on a piece of paper, and you would get a red marker or a pen or something, and you would literally mark where all the settings were. So if the button was pushed, you would fill in that place. That's why the buttons are all hollow on here, is because you would get your little red marker and you would color in that little square that represents the button, and that means the button's pushed. Okay? And the knob, you see there's no indication of the little mark on the knob, because you're going to make it. You're going to get your little marker and you're going to do a little notch there saying that's where the knob is turned to. And you would do this, sometimes we would figure this out ahead of time because we wouldn't always have the mixer with us, but we would have the markup sheet. And so before we would go into the space, we would mark it up. And so we would know what we're going to do. And then we'd just come in, and then I could hand that to somebody and say, okay, just make it look like this. And they'd go, okay. They look at the sheet and they do it. And then that was programmed. Okay, that's how you program an analog mixer, is you mark it up first and then you go. But the nice thing, the other thing is that's your preset. That's your snapshot too. So if something changes, you say, well, check the markup sheet and see if anything's changed. Now, eventually, when cameras got better, and well, because film cameras have been around for a long time, but like just small cameras didn't always take really great pictures, and you couldn't get the level of detail you wanted. But eventually cameras got better, especially when digital cameras came around. And so then we started just taking pictures. So I used to literally just like before I would leave tech and go home, I would just like get a digital camera, I would just go click and take a picture, and then I would email it to the person mixing the show, and I'd say, if it ever stops working, just make it look like the picture, and then if it's still not working, then call me, right? So I'm going to have you do this, not because I think this is a process that you need to learn. I don't think you're probably never going to need to do a markup sheet in your life. I mean, we've pretty much crossed that bridge, right? But what I do need you to do is go through the intellectual exercise of thinking through signal flow. And thinking through the signal flow independent of the console, because a big separation, a big kind of like mental block I see a lot of students struggle with is they say, I don't know that console. You'll put a new digital console in front of them, it's like, I don't know how that one works. I've never used that one before. It's like, yeah, but it's just a console. It has inputs, outputs, buses, auxes, groups, input gains, EQs, pre-fade, post-fade. I mean, they're all the same thing. And the interface is going to look different, but what's happening is the same thing. And you've got to get into your head how the signal flow works so that you just say, well, to make it work, I just got to figure out where the aux controls are, and you go. So this is really, the process I'm going to have to go through is more about that brain exercise of saying, I've got 12 inputs, I've got 6 auxes, 4 groups, 2 of them can be subgroups. And I'm going to give you some parameters, and you have to figure out what would all the controls need to be set to? And that process applies whether you're using an analog console or a digital console. If you haven't thought about that before you step in front of the digital console, if you haven't thought through what you need it to do, you're going to sit and stare at that thing for a week and not know where to begin. And I've seen that happen over and over again here in this very shop, where people will be building their show and they'll get that console out, and I will come to the final look and I will say, all right, let's do this. And they, well, we're still programming the console. Like, what do you mean? Like, well, we still haven't got it to do anything. Well, what have you been doing? Well, we've just been staring at it because we can't figure out how to make it work. It's like, well, what are you trying to do? Well, we haven't figured that out yet. We don't know what we need it to do, and because we don't know how to make it work. It's like, no, what you need it to do is a different problem than how to make it do it, right? And so the thinking through of what do I need it to do, you got to do that first. And you can do that independent of what console is. You can figure out what you need it to do. And then you say, how do I do it on this one? Okay? So your task is this. So you are going to, this assignment, you're going to complete a markup sheet for this console. Your goal is to determine the appropriate programming for the specifications below and indicate that programming on the attached markup sheet. So the markup sheet is really just your evidence that you figured this out, right? That's how you're going to show me that you figured it out, okay? So you bring the markup sheet to the class on the due date, and I don't know if we'll have time for everybody to do this, but I'm going to try to get everybody. The idea is you're going to come to class, and you're going to stand in front of this console, and I'm going to zero out the board, and then you are going to use your markup sheet to make this console do the thing. Okay? And so here's the inputs, right? And here's the output. So I've got I'm saying the mix left is the main audience left, main right audience, and then I've got 4 auxes, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to say that the aux 1 is a drum monitor. It's a monitor for the drummer. Aux 2 is the monitor for the piano player. Aux 3 is the monitor for the bass player. And aux 4 is the monitor for the 2 guitarists. And then here are the notes that you got from those musicians about what they wanted to hear. Okay, so the drummer is like, well, I want to hear myself and the bass player and a little bit of everybody else. That's how they will describe this. And you have to kind of like, okay, I guess I'll just guess on what that means, and then if I get it wrong, they'll tell me, right? And the piano player said, I want to hear everybody except me, but I want to hear the bass most of all. And the bass player says, well, I really need to hear the drums the most, and everyone else just a little bit, okay? And the guitar player wants to hear, this is like no guitar player ever has ever said this, but they want to hear everyone else except themselves. It's usually the opposite, but that's a joke. This is a dig at guitarists. Guitarists are notorious. I'm like, can I get more me in this monitor? Like, yes.
There are like 4 channels, or like there's 2 subs and then 2 aux. So then how would that look for, like, would you group 1 and 2 together and then 3 and 4?
Well, right now, you mean for the auxes?
Yes.
There's 4 auxes. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's actually 6.
Where would it send on the?
So there are physical outputs
Yeah.
here that we'll plug in. So what I'll do is we'll get, before we wrap up today, if we have time, I'll go get 3 more of these, and we'll plug them into each aux so you can hear what's coming out of each one. Okay? So you're going to create a mix of all of this stuff that mixes it out to these main outputs, okay? And then you're going to create these 4 monitor mixes using the aux sends. And you're going to want these to be pre-fader, because on this console, aux 3 and 4 toggles between pre and post fader. You can decide whether you want them to be pre or post. You're probably going to want them all to be pre-fader. By the way, aux 5 and 6 are post fader forever. You can't change that. And 1 and 2 are pre-fader forever. You can't change it. Now, if you are a grad student, which is like a Charlie or an April, I'm going to make you do some extra stuff, because That's how grad school works.
Sounds
Um, you are also going to have the vocal mic on input 9 that you got to deal with.
good. Okay.
And you're going to have, says, reverb on aux 6, and that's going to come back on the input STE2. So I'm going to patch that here before we leave too.
All right.
And I want you to do a subgroup for the drums, just like I did,
So
right?
input into STE2. Was that what you did with the fader before of having?
Right now I have the reverb coming in on input 12.
But that's just what that is, right?
Yeah, just because I only have one channel. The reverb actually creates two separate reverb effects
Okay.
that you could route to two different speakers that could be stereo, but it doesn't have to be. It's just two different types of reverb that can come at you from two different directions. And so I'm going to say use STE2 because STE2 is a 2-channel input, so you can route both of those reverb signals into that. So it'll be on there.
Right now, what you have is you have it going into that other the other fader.
Yeah.
But instead, it would just
Yeah,
be
instead we're
going
going to patch it in
Okay,
here.
understood.
So we'll do that in a second.
I understand.
All right. So if you are an April or a Charlie,
The two channels.
you've got to do that extra stuff, okay? And you're going to bring your little sheet to class next week, right, Brooke? Is that what the syllabus says?
It says September 20. It says September 16th, 2022.
Yeah, but the
syllabus it says September 3rd.
On the syllabus,
Correct.
it says.
Yeah, it's the syllabus. I just haven't updated the actual assignment. What does the syllabus say? That's
the
what
syllabus
matters.
says a week from today.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
So-
next week.
next week. So you have a week to do this. So I'm going to leave this set up, okay? And you can come over here outside of class sometime and
good.
come figure this out. We'll leave the gate open and everything so you can come in. We might, depending on when the shows start building, we might have to move this out there, but I'm hoping we don't. Yes.
When are shop hours now?
Well, you don't have to do it during shop hours.
But like, that are one card holders.
Your one card, if you're a sound student, the one card should let you in between 10 a.m. and 6:30 or 6:45. 6:30. You two, I'm gonna need to figure that out. I'm gonna need to get you added to the one card. Okay.
Yes, please.
So I will make that request. In the meantime, maybe buddy up with one of these folks.
Find a
So-
friend.
Find a friend to swipe you in, and we'll get you in. But I will work on that today.
Cool.
Okay. Any other questions about this? Yes.
So we're allowed to like come in and mess with the board to like.
Yeah.
Okay. I just okay, cool.
That is the assignment. In fact,
Zero it all out. Are you just gonna mess with it all right now?
No.
Just so we don't have a reference. Nice. I'm happy.
oh, I didn't talk about mute.
It's a mute button.
Yeah, but it could, that could mean different things. Sometimes mute means everything after the fader, but everything before the fader still works. Sometimes it means the whole channel strip shuts down.
Okay. So what does it mean right now?
Right, this one is whole channel strip shuts down. I call that an on-off button. If the whole channel strip shuts down, that's supposed to be an on-off button, but some people still call that mute. Just heads up. Anyway, so
if you mute something, it'll shut down the whole channel strip, including any noise that's created from the circuits.
yeah, and the pre-fade auxes and all that.
Okay.
The whole thing
Gotcha.
shuts down.
Oh, so it just gets rid of all the power from that one channel.
Yeah, like just deactivates that. Yeah.
Cool.
Are you just gonna leave that QLab thing running, or
Yep.
should we figure out how to come in and turn that on?
No, I'll just leave it on.
Okay.
Alright.
Keep stepping on this thing. I mean, it's if it's for some reason someone hits escape and stops it, it's just a cue. You just
Okay. But like the computer's gonna be on, we shouldn't have to deal
you
with
shouldn't
it.
have to. It's just a loop.
Right.
It's just a little. I mean, it's like a 10-second loop.
Yeah.
Jason,
Okay.
can you explain the mute button again? So if it's for this board, you said if it mutes, it takes everything like going up, that turns off.
Yeah. So when the mute is on, it shuts down this whole channel strip, which means the sound isn't passing through the fader, but it's also not passing through the auxes. Like everything's off. Okay. I prefer to call that an on-off, but in this case it's labeled mute. I think mute in a more traditional sense would really mean muting is the same thing as ducking the fader all the way down. And if you just duck the fader all the way down, like your pre-fade auxes would still work, right? So a true mute just means duck the fader. But in this case, this console, it's labeled mute, but it's actually an on-off, a channel on-off. So it enables or disables the channel. Yeah.
Do you have an opinion as to?
I have opinions about a lot of things.
Yeah, I shouldn't have.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on? Do you prefer the button where you push it in and then it's passing signal, or undo the button and it's so like?
I'm there.
There are
In,
some
out kind of thing.
There are some boards where like you press the mute button
Yeah.
and it's muted, and then there are other ones where you press the on-off button and then it's starting to pass signal.
I don't really, I mean, I've seen it both ways. I don't have strong feelings either way, but
That's surprising.
yeah.
Sorry, that sounded rude. That was rude. I just,
Alrighty. Other questions? Feel like you know what you're doing? Some of this is, you're going to come in here and you're going to figure this out. Right? You maybe don't know how to do it, but you're going to come in and you're going to move all these knobs and push all these buttons until it starts doing the thing that I've described. Right? Pretend that that guitar player is shouting at you and saying, "What's the problem?
And so,
There's too much me in here." That's never what they would say.
and so we're all getting to the same solution anyway.
Yeah.
But
In the end, it's
try,
theoretically.
yeah.
try and figure out how to do it yourself.
And again, I don't mind if you want to come in as a group of 2 or 3 of you and put your heads together on this. That's totally fine. But when you figure out how to do it, each of you needs to do it. Right? Each of you needs to mark up your sheet and then practice putting those settings in from your sheet so you can see what actually happens. Because remember, the sheet is supposed to reflect the intellectual exercise that you have engaged in. So just make sure that your brain has actually connected all of the concepts so that what is on your sheet actually reflects something that you understand. Okay? So what I don't want you to do is be like, okay, Emma, you figure out all of the preamps, and Charlie, you'll figure out all of the auxes, and I don't want you to do that because then Emma doesn't know how the auxes work. Right? Okay, you understand?
When
Yeah.
we
Brooke?
Emma probably has a more for you.
Okay.
no, turning in like physical print, or can I iPad it?
You can mark it up digitally if you want to. If you really want to have the true old school experience, you're gonna print this out. You're gonna get yourself a red Sharpie.
That
Um,
might be
I'm
nice.
coming in here with a clipboard.
Does it have to be red?
Yes.
It's usually red.
That's what the question was gonna be. So like colors, like.
Well, I would suggest not black, just because you want to make sure that your settings are standing out. And really, it's usually we would do it with pencil, like a red pencil, rather than Sharpie. That way you can change it. But you can do whatever you want. I don't care if you do it digitally. Like you could load up these files. These are just PDF files. You can load up a preview and mark it up, or Acrobat, or whatever, and send that to me. That's fine too. But you need to be able to have it in front of you in class next week. Okay? Because that's what's going to happen. Is I'm going to ask, hopefully all of you, but if we may have run out of time, but hopefully each of you, I'm going to say, all right, get up here and put your settings in here, and then I'm going to see if it does all the things, right? I'm going to pretend to be that bass player, and I'm going to be like, all right, am I hearing what I wanted to hear? We're going to find out, okay?
My turtle.
We're not messing with the Gates compressor or reverb,
No, I wouldn't worry about it. I mean, you can if you want to, but
not for the assignment.
not for the assignment. But I'll leave it here if you want to goof around with patching the insert or something. You can certainly try it.
Please leave the reverb.
Yeah, I'll leave the reverb for you guys. We'll patch that here in a sec. Okay? Other questions? Alrighty. So let me stop the recording.